So far, a lot of our libraries have been experimental in a way, so we've taken them and done them in ways that haven't necessarily been done before, or we've done them in sort of non-traditional ways. This is sort of our first foray into traditional instruments and a more standard sample library. It's also something that hasn't really been explored in sample libraries before. We're all familiar with the orchestral libraries out there and orchestral brass, but no one's really done brass band instruments.
My name's Alan Morrison. I play with the Hammond's Band on soprano cornet.
I'm Jamie Smith. I'm a brass musician from Huddersfield, and I'm here today playing the cornet.
I'm Jim Fieldhouse and I play the euphonium. I'm currently the principal euphonium of the Desford Colliery Brass Band down in Leicestershire.
My name's Siobhan Bates. I'm the principal horn player of Black Dyke Band. I'm 25 years old and I started playing when I was just 3.
Brass banding in this country has been going on for hundreds of years. Bands which would pop up around industry, so coal mines, mills, places like that. Brass bands were very much a community thing in this country, and that tradition has carried on around the north of England, Lancashire, Yorkshire, places in Wales as well. A very high concentration of top quality bands where that industry was.
I actually came to brass instruments through brass banding. It's quite a traditional sort of route that a lot of us took. When I was a kid, it was another parent that met my mother who said, oh, if you want to get rid of him for a couple of hours a week, send him round there and they'll give him a free instrument and some lessons. So for me, I've always played brass as part of the brass banding culture, and later came to playing a bit of trombone, the more commercial stuff.
I've been a professional musician for most of my life. I started playing the trumpet and cornet when I was 7-year-old, taught by my father. Then I moved down to Yorkshire to play with several other bands before ending up at Brighouse and Rastrick Band. I was musical director for a short time. I was soprano cornet player for a short time, and since retirement I'm now back playing with the Hammond's Band as soprano cornet.
I think banding is definitely something that for many people is to do with their social life. There are bands all over the country that are community bands where people can come together of all ages as well, which is great. You know, you might get a 10-year-old and an 80-year-old in the same band. It brings people together regardless of whether you want to be competitive or whether you're just happy doing a concert in your local church or a concert in the park on a Sunday in the summer.
Black Dyke were formed in 1855. We are current Yorkshire Regional and National Champions of Great Britain. It used to be a mill, and it used to be where the workers of the mill went to socialise and to play. The mill closed down, but still the brass band is running today.
I think there's a lot of bands in the north that, as much as a brass band can be, is probably more of a household name than others. The band that I play for is a band called Grimethorpe.
I played for Grimethorpe for around about 15 years. When I joined the band, I had to earn my underground ticket by training underground for 8 weeks, which was absolute hell. Like everybody else in the band, we were paid as underground miners, but we were more or less professional musicians.
A lot of the most well-known and the longest standing brass bands stemmed from the mills and the factories. I think there were a few quite canny factory owners that actually set up brass bands because it was a good way to ensure the workers didn't go to the pub in the evening.
A huge part of brass banding is competitions. You get huge competitions in this country attended by many brass bands. It's hugely competitive and taken very, very seriously.
I think most people would think we are clinically insane to put ourselves through sitting in a lovely concert hall, but instead of enjoying being in that lovely concert hall and just playing a fantastic programme of music, you're sitting there worrying about the fact that you've got to play this horrible thing and 20 other bands are going to come on and all play the same piece, which in itself is a bit peculiar.
We tend to play a 20-minute piece of music, which will test every member of the band, not just the soloists.
It's about precision, being really precise with what you play, being really precise with the tuning, and that poses completely different challenges, you know, having maybe 50 bars rest and having to play something perfectly in tune is a very different way of playing.
And yeah, I think to a certain extent that is the one thing about banding that is a little strange, is that we've somehow managed to turn music into a blood sport.
Whether that's a good thing or not, I think it definitely has helped drive top bands to maintain a phenomenal standard. We're talking about absolute world-class players here. The level of control and skill, they really are absolute masters of their craft, and we've been very fortunate to really capture their sound and tone, and hopefully that comes across in the instrument. Alright, so should we go top C, little dynamic, shortest length? In this collection we've recorded soprano cornet, B-flat cornet, flugelhorn, tenor horn and euphonium. There's a couple of reasons why we chose those. One is that within those instruments you cover a huge range of the sound palette of the brass band, but another reason that we've gone for those and not included instruments like tuba and trombone, which also do appear in a brass band, is these instruments tend to be like principal seats in the band, and they'll often take the melody or the lead part.
There's 28 to 30 musicians in a standard British style brass band, and 10 of those are cornets. It's our version in brass bands of trumpet, so it's essentially like the violin section.
The euphonium has a similar role to, say, the cello in the orchestra. Often the principal euphonium and the principal cornet will work together, doubling in the octave.
During my career, I've played B-flat cornet and obviously soprano cornet now, but I've also done quite a substantial amount of trumpet work with orchestras in places like the BBC and ITV. It is different to orchestral brass, mainly because of the fact that a cornet is a conical bore. The pipes get gradually larger all the way around the instruments. On a trumpet, it's a cylindrical bore, which means that the pipes around up to the crook and to the bell are constant in its size.
And that gives the cornet a slightly more mellow sound than the trumpet, and the trumpet's a little bit more direct.
There's a kind of difference between the approach of playing the trumpet as playing the cornet in the brass band.
We tend to play these instruments with quite a heavy amount of vibrato, which you wouldn't normally find within the orchestral world.
French horn, for example, you wouldn't use any vibrato on that. It's quite a simple technique. Once you get used to it, you just move your jaw up and down as fast as you can to get those vibrations flowing through the note.
I think it's something that you are taught to do from a very, very young age, and it's almost part and parcel of playing the instrument. If you want to play the cornet, you have to use vibrato.
Because you can change the energy of a phrase with how much vibrato you use and the speed of vibrato.
So it lends itself a little bit more to lyrical playing, whereas the trumpet is more of a pointed, bright, in-your-face kind of playing, although I'm quite sure trumpet players would disagree with that.
I'm lucky in a sense because I studied the trumpet at the Royal Northern College of Music for 4 years, so I've got the best of both worlds. On the cornet, you'll see a lot of technique, a massive, really, really vast range.
I was very fortunate as a child when I was learning to play. My father introduced me to all different kinds of music, and I used to sit next to the record player and play along both as a trumpet player with orchestras and dance bands, but perhaps even more so as a cornet player. I listened to these pieces over and over again, then sat and played them without actually seeing the music.
Culturally, around here, and as someone who's grown up with brass bands, they do play a really big part in people's lives, and it's quite surprising that brass band instruments played in a brass band style hasn't really been done by sample libraries before. Yeah, beautifully done. Yeah, just the last one then, when you're ready.
Our approach to recording this library has been to treat it as though there was a full brass band in the room. So we've had all of the players in their natural seating position where they would be sat in a brass band. So the idea is that when you're using all of these instruments in a composition, they're going to fit together really nicely. But for people who might not want to use the library with all of their instruments pre-panned, we're also offering this centered position. So if you want to take any of these instruments into a different context rather than their brass band layout, you can take those stereo mics and place them in any composition. We're recording here in the nave, a beautiful studio that we've used a few times now for different products. It's a fairly tight reverb, but it does have a really spacious sound. It just works beautifully for these brass instruments. So we've got mics all over the room. We've got a space pair far back, and then we've got outriggers a little bit closer, spot mics, a pair of mics in the conductor's position, so we get the stereo spread of the instruments as well as the more dispersed sound of the room. We've also devised this new system that allows us to freely position any instrument in any seat, and we've done that by recording impulse responses in every seating position. So you can take a euphonium and place it where the flugelhorn would be, and any other combination really. So it does give you the freedom to, say, move the cornet units to where the trumpets would be in an orchestra, if that's what you want to do. You're going to get the natural reverb, you're going to get the different mic positions, so it's going to be a lot more realistic than typical panning.
Yeah, very nice. Great, now you get to do all that again twice. Wow. That's so impressive on those high notes, I don't know how you do it. How do you do it?
This is our first commercial product where we've sampled legato.
As that'll probably do for these top ones because we don't need quite as many. Cool.
Something that's quite common is to record the transitions quite short and then immediately crossfade them into a sustain. The problem is that when you crossfade into a sustain, especially on solo instruments, you get a brief period where it sounds like there are two instruments playing. So our approach was a bit more lengthy, but we decided to record full sustains after each transition.
The way we've done the legato sampling by having the players play the full notes mean that they can apply that vibrato how they naturally would when they transition from the starting note to the landing note.
You get this beautiful expressive sound with each transition, really.
Being involved in a session like this where it's just being quite repetitive, playing very, very simple music, but having to play it absolutely perfectly. I got into a kind of mechanical routine with it. I thought after several minutes of realising that it's just going to be the same all the way through, I developed into a metronomic style with the click track that really helped in just getting everything exactly the same. The breathing, the articulation, and the air into the instrument, and just repeating it over and over and over again. And sometimes even professional musicians, we drop into little habits that cause problems. Sometimes we have to go to other professionals and get a little bit of advice and say, well, why? A bit like a golf swing. If something suddenly goes wrong with a golf swing, the ball starts going off that way, you have to go to somewhere, even a teacher, and say, put me back on the right track. What we've done today with the sampling has got me right the way back to the basics of playing. Anybody looking at the music that we've been playing would say, well, anybody can play that. But there's a technique to playing it absolutely spot on. And these 2 days of sampling has been exactly that. The pit closure of Grimethorpe in 1992 was announced in the same week as the national finals that year. We had the world's media descend on the village and the story of Grimethorpe was shown worldwide. A few years later, Channel 4 approached the band and asked if they could make a film of the story of the whole political scene around it with the closure of the pit. And hence the film Brass Off appeared on our screens.
If you're looking for examples of brass band music used within major films, the obvious one is Brass Off.
Brass Off.
Brassed off.
Brassed off.
But that is because it was about a brass band.
I had decided to leave the band at the end of 1994, mainly because of the pit closure and we had to find different work. I became a self-employed professional musician. Unfortunately for me, the film started production in the early part of 1995. So I did take part in 1 or 2 sound recordings before that. I didn't feature on the film, which became quite a disappointment for me.
I don't know of any films that really contain brass band instruments, at least not that comes to mind.
I've not really seen a brass band used for a major motion picture unless it's specifically because there is a brass band in the major motion picture.
That's a really good question, actually. Never been asked that.
There's Full Monty, which was Stocksbridge Band.
The one with the pig. Was it called Babe? I think that's a brass band.
Babe with Black Tyke.
Certain orchestral pieces of music, like the Planets, for example, that include the euphonium or the tenor tuba. Tchaikovsky was using the cornet before the trumpet, really. So the trumpet was basically tonic dominant, and the cornet was playing some melodies. I'm thinking about 1812. The main theme in that was on the cornet, not the trumpet. It was always seen as more versatile.
Their softer tone quality really sort of lends itself well to that lyrical side of playing.
And it would be really lovely to see some brass band instruments as part of film scores in the future.
So we need more of it.
We need to get more film, exactly, yeah.
It was wonderful, not just for the band, but for the brass band movement in general, explaining what a brass band does, what happened in the communities of places like Grimethorpe. And of course, it's now 25, 30 years old, and it still stands as a great film telling the story of that wonderful week in 1992, but also about the wider community, which I think has been very important.
When we were younger, both of us did actually start learning music by playing the cornet. So this project and this library is something that does mean quite a lot to us, not just because we're from the north, but because brass band music, in a way, was our way into music as a wider career.
I don't have a classical background in composition. It all kind of came from my use of sample libraries and making my own, approaching it from a sound design perspective. And I think the atmosphere layers have become a thing we're known for. If people see a fractured sounds library, they expect to have atmosphere layers in it. This library might come out a bit of a surprise to some of our users because it's more of a traditional sample library where we're kind of capturing the instruments how they would be in a live recording, which is a little bit different from what we've done in the past. We've
sampled them as solo instruments, and you don't necessarily have to use them in a brass band context. These solo instruments will add a new colour and a unique soloist sound to all sorts of genres, be it orchestral or more sort of traditional brass band writing.
You wouldn't necessarily use them just in place of orchestral brass because they are a completely different tonal colour in themselves. It adds something that isn't really there in the orchestra. It's quite hard to find examples of them being used in film music, but really the instruments are capable of really beautiful melodic playing. So we'd really like to see more film music utilising brass band instruments, and hopefully this library will kind of give people a chance to explore these new colours and make brass bands a little bit more of a popular set of sounds.